back to the Swamp 24/7 podcast. I'm Thomas Goldcamp, joined here by my Swamp 24/7 co-host, Blake Alderman. Blake, we got a little bit of news to get to before we begin kind of a Q&A session on this episode of the podcast. Recruiting news, something right up your alley. Florida landed a commitment from four-star receiver Isaiah Bond. Why don't you tell us a little bit about him and what Florida's getting with this commitment?
You know, a quality receiver from the Peach State, but not only a quality receiver, but when you look at some of the guys that Florida's landed over the last couple cycles, you know, I call those taller guys, you know, trees. You know, Florida's landed a lot of those tree guys, you know, those 6'3" and up, big body kind of guys who may have some speed on their hands. Isaiah Bond in the state semifinals for Georgia last weekend, he ran a 10.48 in the 100-meter dash. I mean, this is a fast kid, you know, elite track speed that translates to the football field. You know, his first clip on his huddle tape is in the state championship game from Georgia. He plays for Buford High School, who won a state championship last year against Lee County. The first clip on his highlight tape is him going long, you know, kind of taking the top off that defense, catching a touchdown, breaking a couple tackles on the way to the end zone. So, you know, a guy that has big time track speed, like I said, maybe not quite as polished as a receiver, which isn't out of the ordinary for some of these guys coming out of high school. You know, you've got a guy like Billy Gonzalez in Florida who has done a good job developing guys, you know, teaching them the little things that makes them those, you know, takes a good receiver to a great receiver at the next level. So, you know, really good get for Florida. He ranks as a 3-star on the 24/7 Sports Composite, which averages all the rankings, you know, ESPN 24/7 rivals. But on 24/7, they're much higher than him. You know, he's the number 237 overall player in the class, 4-star player. So big get for Florida committing to them over guys like Alabama, Georgia, who were recruiting him as a cornerback. You know, Texas, you know, Miami was the early on leader there that, you know, kind of changed the tides. He actually visited Miami for a off-campus or what do you call it, a self-guided type visit where he was there. You know, this is a guy that a couple months ago was pegged to Miami. Florida offers, gets things trending their way. So, you know, big get for Florida on Mother's Day. And, you know, it's a guy that you can definitely continue to build around your quarterback committed Nick Evers, you know, getting him more weapons for the future for Florida. So I really like the get a lot.
Yeah, there's 2 or 3 things I really like about him. First off, like you said, playing for Buford, you know, obviously high-level competition. Anytime you got a guy that, you know, has the offer list, like you said, Alabama, Georgia, kind of in pursuit, you know you're after a good guy. And then I think, you know, just Florida, like you said, you know, they've landed some bigger receivers the last few years. And I think the one thing when you think back to, you know, Dan Mullen's first stint at Florida and Urban Meyer and kind of the glory days of Florida football, you know, in the post-Steve Spurrier era, it was all about speed. And I think when you're talking about a 10.48, man, I don't think a lot of people appreciate how fast that is for a high school prospect. I mean, that's just blazing fast. And I think, you know, I mean, listen to Urban Meyer talk about who they wanted in the draft that they were hoping would fall to 25. It was Kadarius Toney. You know, he loves that kind of speed. And I think, you know, with Florida's offense, you know, the way it's going, you'd like to see them continue to add that type of speed. So, Blake, let's roll right into the Q&A session because our first question is actually about the receiver core. Florida's obviously losing a bunch of guys to the NFL. I think they've had 6 pass catchers now drafted in the last 2 years between the 3 receivers that went last year and then you know, Trayvon Grimes, Kyle Pitts, and Kadarius Toney. So big question marks for Florida at receiver next fall. The question we have is, how do you see the snap count trending for the wide receiver core? With a change in offensive philosophy, will there be a different pecking order based on blocking from the receiver position more than pass catching in 2018? Or, in your opinion, could we stay more vertical in our passing game given the time Emory has been in the system? And I'll go ahead and give you first stab at that one.
You know, I think there could be some maybe more blocking just because I think when you look at Florida's running back room, I mean, that's a strength. You've got, you know, guys like Damian Pierce, Malik Davis, you know, even Naquan Wright, you know, then you add DeMarcus Bowman, who's a former 5-star player. I think that if you can get the offensive line to really open up holes and continue to improve that run blocking game, I think running is going to be a strength. And then you've even got Emory Jones, who's more of a true dual threat type of guy that can hurt you with his legs. I don't know that necessarily means that the snap count changes because I think that a guy like Billy Gonzalez has, you know, even just over the course of his career, has always prided his receivers on the ability to block. So I don't know that really changes any kind of snap count. Do I think there will be a difference maybe from last year where Florida threw the ball as many times to compare to this year? Absolutely. You know, and I think that just goes with the strengths of, you know, Emory Jones's game in general and just having that stable of running backs, like I said. But, you know, I don't know that it really means that the snap count changes or you know, anything to that effect, because I think like guys like Justin Shorter, Trent Whittemore, Jacob Copeland, you know, even Xavier Henderson, I think that those are going to be your guys that you're going to count on this year.
I think Florida's done a good job of rotating through kind of different groups of receiver. I don't know that they're going to do that quite as much. You know, obviously they want to get more guys involved. They'd like to be 5-6 deep at receiver. But when I look at this group compared to maybe last year, I don't think the depth is quite developed yet. And I think it'll get there over the course of the year. But I think early on, you're looking at very heavy snap counts for Jacob Copeland, for Justin Shorter, for Trent Whittemore, and then for Xavier Henderson. I think Jaquavian Frazier is a guy that I think in the first couple games, we're going to find out whether or not he's ready to be in that 4 or 5 mix, as a guy that's getting major snaps. Jamarcus Weston's a guy that the coaches have really talked up a bunch this offseason, and really, honestly, ever since they signed him back in, I believe it was the 2019 class. I'm gonna date myself. I think it was the 2019 class where he came in with Deontay Marks and Trent Whittemore. I mean, they've been raving about him from day one as a guy that is a phenomenal athlete. Personally, I haven't really been sold on it from the limited amounts we've seen, and granted, it has been limited. We're talking about really his first fall camp, maybe his first spring, in terms of what we were able to see, because obviously last year everything was shut down. But I think you're going to see really, really heavy snaps for those first 4 guys I mentioned. I think you probably won't see quite as much rotation. I do think Florida will probably use the tight ends quite a bit, and that could also, along with the, having a deep group at running back, I think you see the receiver rotation shrink a little bit, because I think we're going to see a little bit less 3 and 4 wide type looks, and maybe a little bit more 21 personnel, 12 personnel, meaning 2 backs, 1 tight end, 1 back, 2 tight ends. I think we're going to see more of that kind of thing next year. I don't know that Emory necessarily changes a whole lot, and we've got a couple questions about Emory, so maybe I'll dig into that a little bit later, and we'll roll into the next question. Is there any chance that Jean Delance is a bench warmer?
I don't think so. I think that at this point, I mean, you've seen how they continue to throw him into the fire. I don't know that Florida really has those youth, the younger guys on the offensive line. I didn't really see or hear anything that, that they had surpassed him in the spring. So I don't think so.
I mean, he started 25 games over the last 2 years. I just don't think you're going to see a coaching staff go away from that kind of experience unless there's a clear head and shoulders upgrade. And right now, like you said, that's not what we got out of spring ball. We didn't really get reports that guys like Michael Tarquin were pushing for that role. And I think the fact that they're looking at maybe Stuart Reese inside at center, I think we've talked about it in the past. I think that maybe potentially limits your options, because I think a lot of fans would like to see Josh Braun maybe bounce outside to one of those tackle spots. When you talk about Stone obviously leaving, Stone Forsyth, Richard Girage slides outside, but he's a guy that's worked inside for a couple of years. I'm a little surprised, and we've talked about this before, that Florida hasn't really tried to recruit more true tackle types, because when they recruited Josh Braun, that was where we thought he would be. I don't know if it's that this staff feels like it's easier to step in right away on the interior because they can surround you with a little bit of experience. I know they've talked about that in the past with, bringing a guy like Ethan White along. They wanted veterans on either side of him so they can kind of coach him along. And maybe that they feel that's their best way to get, the really athletically talented guys like Ethan White or Josh Braun involved early. But I'd like to see them put more emphasis on developing guys as true tackles from day one, because I think when you're at the SEC level, you really have to, fine tune that as your sole position. I mean, you're going against elite edge rushers, guys that are going to be in the NFL almost every week, on a week-to-week basis coming off that edge. So I'd like to see more of that. Unfortunately, at this point, Blake, I'm with you. I think 25 starts in the last 2 years. I just don't see this Florida staff going away from that. Blake, let's talk a little bit about Emory. We've gotten a lot of questions about Emory. A good chunk of this Q&A is going to be about Emory Jones. First and foremost, I guess, a lot of the questions circle on his big picture ability. He's a guy that's going into his 4th season now at Florida, so obviously not just a lot of expectations that go along with having that time to kind of be groomed in Dan Mullen's system, but there's even some NFL draft analysts that have him kind of circled as a potential high draft pick. I want to say Pro Football Focus put out a first-round mock the other day that had 3 Florida players in the top in the first round, and
I think Emory was 6, right?
2 of them in the top 10, and they had Emory Jones going number 6, and I'm looking at it, I'm like, there's no way. And I mean, maybe I'm wrong. You tell me what you think about kind of where I guess these analysts have Emory Jones slotted right now.
I'm in the same camp as you. I don't know that. I mean, he's going to have to do a lot to be 6, if we're going to put that as the number to ask if that's, going to be the case or not. I think he's going to have to really light it up this year. Florida's going to have to, win the SEC, or at least the SEC East, have a kind of a game like they did, if it's Alabama, who they play in the SEC championship game, or if not win that game. I think Florida's going to have to, he's going to really have to have a year that, where he puts Florida into the, the college football playoffs type of year, right, to really get that kind of rise up a draft board. So do I think he can have better tape to get him some draft talk, absolutely. I think that, if he comes out and he shows he's a true dual threat guy, because you are seeing the NFL a lot more open to guys that can hurt you with their legs and their arm. But I think he's going to have to really show a big jump from what we've seen from him so far, which we have seen some flashes of him so far, absolutely. But he's going to have to do it on a consistent basis. I mean, to really move up those kind of draft boards, to be talking first round.
Well, my thing is, we obviously know what he can do well. I think when you look at what he's done as a runner the last 3 years, particularly when defenses know exactly what he's going to do 9 times out of 10, he's been a really, really effective runner. And I don't think he maybe gets enough credit for that. We talk about being a dual threat quarterback, obviously, but his ability to kind of hit the hole quickly and be slippery in the hole, I think maybe gets underrated a little bit. My problem is when you're talking about being an NFL draft pick, you're looking at all the guys that just went. Not only are some of them real good dual threat prospects, but they're pretty accurate. I mean, you have to be able to throw the football. Right now, I'm not doubting Emory Jones's arm, like his arm itself. I think accuracy, from what I've seen, is a little bit lacking, and I think some of that could be due to just lack of playing time within the offense, and I think that's going to change this year. But I want to see his decision making and his accuracy before I'm ready to say he's an NFL draft pick. To get to the second part of that question, Blake, do we think he's going to have enough game tape to potentially jump after 1 year as the starter? I'm going to go ahead and say no. I think by the end of the year, he's going to be a guy that fans are really excited about going into 2022. But I think there's going to be some growing pains. I mean, you've got Alabama in Game 3. You're going to be going against an elite defense. You've got some other good defenses on the schedule. I just think there's going to be a little bit of a growth curve for Emory, particularly given the departures at the skill positions. We saw how rough that looked in the Cotton Bowl. It's going to take time for this offense to gel. And, big picture wise, that's one of the reasons the defense has to really, really take steps forward, because I look at this team on paper, given the question marks that we have about Emory Jones, and not that he can't develop to be really good, but I think there's too many question marks on this team for me to view this as anything other than a year where Florida just has to avoid kind of taking a step back, momentum wise. So
I can see that as well.
All right, Blake, next question. Out of the players drafted in the NFL draft a week or two ago, who landed in the best position to be successful? I'll go ahead and start with this one. I think Kyle Pitts. I think Atlanta, obviously, the Falcons had a lot of question marks defensively, and so that's part of going into the draft. Even Kyle didn't know necessarily if he'd be the pick there at number 4. A lot of people talked about Atlanta maybe trading back to accumulate some picks and kind of bolster that defense. The flip side of that is the reason, a lot of people had them maybe going defense is because they have a pretty good offense. I mean, you're talking about some of the receiving options that they have. Julio, you got a veteran quarterback in Matt Ryan that probably has a couple years left in the tank. I just think when you look at the other weapons that Atlanta has, he's going to be a guy that, is going to be able to go in and, if he goes to a team that's really using him as their sole offensive piece, maybe he has a tougher go of it because he's, trying to not only get used to, the bigger, faster, stronger NFL, but now he's like the guy that everybody has circled. I don't think Kyle Pitts is a guy that you necessarily circle when you go up to face Atlanta. Obviously, he's a guy you're going to be aware of, but there's so many other options that Atlanta has that I think he's in a really, really good spot.
I would go Kyle Trask, and I say that just because you have a chance to go.
Because you're a Tampa fan.
I'm A, because I'm slightly biased, and B, because I do think he has a chance to learn from Tom Brady, which Tom Brady isn't the biggest teacher type of guy. I mean, that's been pretty much, his kind of reputation from being in the league that, if there's going to be 100 reps at practice, more than likely, if he wants to take all 100 reps, he's going to take them.
Yeah.
But I think he has a chance. Kyle, being a backup for most of his career, I think has taught him how to prepare, how to observe. And I think that being even if you're not getting, the hands-on teaching from Brady, I think just watching him through observation, I think is going to be a really good fit for him. I even said it, I believe, on our last podcast, that a lot of the things that Kyle Trask does good as a player is what Tampa wants to do on offense. He's got these big, tall receivers. He's got, different varieties of receivers there. He's got a defense that's going to really play well for him. If Bucks can play the type of defense they did in the playoffs, I think that, it's a really good fit for him. I don't think he's a guy that needed to, be in the draft to where he's, get picked up and make an impact immediately. I think that him having a couple years or however long that Brady wants to be the guy in Tampa, I think that those learning years are going to be important for him to come along. So whenever that day, if it does come, he's ready. And I think that's a really good fit for him.
I think the observation point is really good. I think he's very good at absorbing information, even if he's not out there actually going through the reps. I mean, when you talk about a guy that was a backup in high school, even to be able to not only get to the next level into a college program, but then to be able to take over the way he did against Kentucky in 2019 and really just continue without a hitch, I mean, that says a lot about a guy who can absorb without necessarily being able to go through the reps in motion on the field. And coaches always talk about that. Guys learn in different ways. Some guys can see it on the whiteboard and they've got it. I think Kyle Trask is one of those guys. But I think the other thing, you mentioned it, getting to watch Tom Brady and how he goes through his preparation, how he motivates his teammates. I think a lot of the intangibles are what makes that such a great fit for Kyle Trask, more so than the actual system itself or the opportunity he has to potentially become a starter in the next few years. Just being able to watch Tom Brady go through the motions, I think that's an unbelievable opportunity for Kyle Trask. Blake, let's take one more question, unless you got something to add.
No, I was actually going to take the next stab at reading the next one off for you.
There you go. Read the next one, and then we'll take a quick break.
Who do you predict gets the most rushing attempts, and who gets the most receiving targets?
So rushing attempts, I'm going to cheat a little bit, and I'm going to say Emory Jones. I think
that's who I would think too.
I think with the amount that they're going to run the ball and just having 5 different running backs that I think are going to be capable of getting touches next fall, the 3 that obviously got them last year in Dameon Pierce, Malik Davis, and Naquan Wright. Then you add, Lorenzo Lingard supposedly had a really, really good spring with DeMarcus Bowman sidelined. I think if Bowman gets healthy, he's a guy that I think the staff will probably try to force feed a little bit. So when you talk about 5 different guys that are going to potentially get touches in the backfield, and then you have Emory
there are so
Jones.
Many running backs that I didn't even remember Lingard in the rotation. There's just that many. When I talked about him earlier,
and Emory's going to be in there every snap. So I think the amount of times he's going to be able to pull it, I would not be surprised, Blake. I know this question didn't really ask about yardage. I wouldn't be surprised if Emory Jones put together like an 800, 900-yard rushing season, to me.
I wouldn't either. Whenever you look at the track record of Dan Mullen that he's had with these rushing quarterbacks, I know he rushes them a lot. And I think that you mentioned it earlier, and I thought it was a really good point that Emory Jones he's slippery quick, because not only can he hit the hole and he can be gone, faster than you would think a normal person do, but he's just very elusive when he runs. So I do think that, not only, slipping through some of those tackles, but having that speed to pick up some extra yardage. I think that's, you're onto something with that one.
All right. I'll turn the second half of the question to you. Who gets the most receiving targets?
Most receiving targets, man, that's tough. I would think that Jacob Copeland.
That's who I was.
I think that just the fact that he kind of has the skill set just from when you've seen him run in high school, being able to do end arounds, different things. Obviously that's not a receiving target, but I just think the versatility he can have on the field will be able to move him, or that Florida will be able to move him around in different spots to create mismatches. And I think that those mismatches are going to lead to receptions for him. Yeah, and he's also waited a long time, and I think it's time for those wheels to start turning for him.
I think he's going to be in position to be a guy that's getting enough snaps that he's going to produce, and I think he's going to be the guy that ends up being a guy that has worked with Emory for the last 3 years. I mean, you think about it, they've been kind of on that backup,
right?
Not really chemistry. Scout team, but they should have a lot of chemistry from that time together, more so than maybe a guy like Justin Shorter, who's only been around a year. I think he's your guy. If you were going dark horse on that, I'd say Xavier Henderson maybe. I think he's going to have a big year. But yeah, I got to go with Copeland.
See, I was actually even thinking maybe a dark horse being a tight end, just because whenever you have a new running back, a new quarterback that is more of a runner and kind of, moving around the pocket, those tight ends are usually like your safety net. So I was actually thinking that could be a dark horse as well. I don't know which one, that's maybe Keon Zipper. Yeah. So I don't know that I could give you a direct answer. So that's why I went with Copeland.
Gotcha. All right, Blake, let's take a quick break. We've got plenty of other questions to get to from our Swamp 24/7 subscribers. We'll take a quick commercial break, and we will be right back. Welcome back to the Swamp 24/7 podcast. I'm Thomas Goldcamp here with Blake Alderman. We're taking a little time today to go through questions from our subscribers in a Q&A format. So we'll get to a couple other ones here. Blake, I'm going to lead you off with a recruiting question going into the second half of the show. Are there any recruits who could be on commitment watch that are coming in the early June period? Obviously, Florida's going to be pretty busy during that time.
I think the one that just off the top of my head without pulling up, the official visit list, which I am pulling up right now, I think Terrence Gibb, the 4-star running back out of, Winter Park area right there in Orlando area. He's the one that I've felt pegged. I already have a crystal ball to Florida in there for him. I think a guy that's in state that could easily get to campus, later on for an official visit. The fact that Florida's bringing him in early for an official visit to me says that they feel pretty confident. If you're confident enough to bring in a guy in that early for an official visit, I think that there's definitely some momentum there for Florida. I've thought that Florida was a team to beat for quite a while. He's wanting to have a decision made sometime in the summer. He has some other official visits. I believe Florida State and Tennessee are the other two that he has penciled in right now. It just seems like he's one of those guys where the stars are kind of aligning to where, I could see him pulling the trigger sometime in June. I mean, I'm kind of looking through now. just with a lot of these guys, the dead period opening up in June, it's been a year and a half since they've been able to take visits. I think that some of these guys wait things out and they take more visits, maybe, kind of looking through things, I think that that's probably the one that really sticks out the most to me, which is Terrence Gibbs.
Let me kind of jump around a little bit on our questionnaire sheet here. The running back recruiting landscape, Blake. I think you've said on Swamp 24/7 that UF would like to take 2 running backs this cycle.
Mm-hmm.
Is Florida setting themselves up for? I'm just going to read the question for another Knoxing in the high school market. And what has this staff done to make you believe that getting 2 good high school running backs is remotely realistic?
I think at this point they've put out so many offers, and I think that when you cast a wide net like that, that tells me that they want to take two. I think Terrence Gibbs being, probably a likely get for Florida. I think you've got one guy there now. There's plenty of other guys, Katron Allen, Omari and Hampton, Gibrain Payne, Damari Alston. I mean, there are plenty of other running backs that Florida's still recruiting there. So just the wide net that they've casted there tells me that they're more than likely going to take two. Will it work out that way? I mean, you look at how Florida has fared with high school running backs over the course of there. That's, where the Knox term comes in there. But, a lot of those guys that, Greg Knox had a chance to get, sure, there were some misses. There's always going to be misses on the cycle. Dan Mullen did kind of, turned down a lot of those guys. He made the choice not to go for some of those guys. There's been guys in the past cycles that that Florida decided, or Mullen, decided, hey, we're going to move on. We're going to do something else. We're going to do something different. Sure. So I do think there is some unfair, kind of laughter at Knox about the fact that Florida has struggled with the high school running backs, because I do think that if Mullen didn't turn some of those guys down, I do think that Florida would have had some commitments there. Did it work out in the sense to where they got some former 5-stars through the transfer portal, like Lorenzo Lingard, like DeMarcus Bowman? Yeah. I mean, sure, those guys turned out to be, big time players that Florida has now. But to me, I think just the sheer number of, offers they have out right now really sticks to me that they're going to try to take two. And I think that just the fact that they're communicating with so many different guys tells me as well that, get one and then you have to continue to look for another guy.
Yeah. And it's not that Florida hasn't missed on a couple of those running back targets, but like you said, I think the staff, was well aware that there would be opportunities in the transfer portal in both of those cycles with Lingard and Bowman. And so, you may not know for sure that you're going to go out and land those guys in the transfer portal the following offseason, but you have a pretty good idea that there's going to be interest there based on your previous recruiting of a guy like DeMarcus Bowman. A lot of these guys in the state of Florida, guys that went to Lakeland or, what have you, you have enough contact between players that are on your team and are kind of knowing, where a guy like DeMarcus Bowman's head at, that where you can be really selective in the high school ranks. And I think that's kind of what happened in that recruiting cycle. So I'm with you. I don't know that the heat is entirely justified on Greg Knox, just in terms of that recruiting angle. But, I do think it will be telling if Florida can go out there and land 2 good backs in this cycle. So, Blake, next question. We have a question. I believe that safety play will be the weak unit with tackle, then kicker, punter right behind. What do you feel will be our Achilles heel?
Achilles heel. I would say probably safety. I think that, them, I know that's what they mentioned in the question, but, just the fact that they're having some guys last year that, were upperclassmen guys, you've got some younger guys in there too. I think some growing pains will happen.
I'm going to go a different route, and I think a lot of people, this may surprise a lot of people. I actually think the safety play will be okay because I think that there are some really talented, athletic, young options back there, and I think the front seven is really going to make it easy on the back end this year. I think you're going to see a lot of improvement in the secondary just based on the fact that the front seven is going to take a real step forward. I love the 2 the defensive tackle additions that Florida has. I think that's going to allow guys like Brenton Cox, Zach Carter, Andrew Chatfield, Chris Bogle to really kind of get after the quarterback. And we know how aggressive Todd Grantham likes to be. I just think you're going to see them be a little bit more effective in getting to the quarterback quicker, and that makes safety play a lot easier. And so I could actually see that safety group being pretty optimistic in terms of maybe forcing some turnovers, getting after passes that are thrown in the air and maybe a little bit errant based on the pressure. I'll go ahead and say I think receiver might actually be the Achilles heel on this team.
Right. I could see that too.
I think because
lost a lot of guys for sure.
And the other thing is, it's one of those positions that works hand in hand with the quarterback, and I've expressed my concerns a little bit about Emory Jones's accuracy. I think when you couple that with a group that is really going to be trying to kind of assert itself and find its footing, you may have some frustration early in the season. And I'm really, really curious to see how a group that is young has maybe been a little bit volatile when you talk about guys like Jacob Copeland in terms of touches and just being involved in the offense. I'm really curious to see how that dynamic plays out, particularly if Florida really leans on the run early. What does that look like at receiver for some of these guys that have been waiting their turn, in Copeland's case now 3 years? What does it look like if they're not getting the kind of touches they want? And then frankly, I think the unit is just so unproven that, I mean, let's talk about who we're counting on really here. I mean, Jacob Copeland, Justin Shorter, you feel okay about those two based on what you saw last year. Xavier Henderson, really, really good prospect. I think we saw some flashes last year, but really you're still talking about potential. Same kind of thing with Trent Whittemore. Past that, we're really banking on whatever these coaches are saying. I mean, the guys coming in, you would know better than me. Guys like Dejon Reynolds, I know was impressive in the spring. We're talking about the spring against the secondary that really was pretty much all new in the spring. Kyrie Elam didn't even play most of the first half of the spring. So it's hard for
And
me
that's not
to
even to
know.
talk about guys like Weston and Frazier's, like you mentioned before, that have been in the program for a little while.
And we haven't really
Weston
seen
more
them.
so than Frazier's, but again,
Yeah.
just haven't really seen him. It's just the unknown there.
So
I get what you're saying.
I'm gonna go with receiver as my Achilles heel. I think Billy Gonzalez does a heck of a job. I would not be surprised at all if Gonzalez develops those guys and they step in and kind of play without missing a beat. I thought last year that receiver was a pretty big question mark, and certainly they showed me wrong. I mean, I never saw Kadarius Toney doing what he did. Kyle Pitts, we thought he'd be good, but to be that level, I didn't really see that coming. So maybe Florida gets great development. Maybe I'm completely wrong. Maybe safety is the weak link. But I don't know. I have a lot of question marks about receiver. Blake, let's talk about freshmen. Everybody loves to talk about true freshmen. All eyes on 5-star cornerback Jason Marshall. We want one player on each side of the ball that we believe will make the earliest impact, and you cannot include Jason Marshall. I'll go first. I think on offense, I'm going to go with the guy that I just talked about, Dejon Reynolds. I think getting him in the spring, having the unknowns at receiver, I think he's a guy that can get involved right away. I was a little bit surprised, Blake, that guys like Frazier's and Henderson didn't really get more run last year. I know that Florida was deep. They didn't necessarily need those guys. But I thought they'd be a little bit more featured. I wouldn't be surprised if a guy like Dejon Reynolds is a guy that is featured a little bit more on offense as a true freshman. I'll wait on defense, but what's your pick on offense?
On offense, I was actually thinking Reynolds myself, but then I was thinking about Nick Elksness. You look at just the, the question in general is who will make the biggest impact? Does that mean this year or does that mean in general? So I kind of went more with an in general because you've got Keon Zipper, you've got Kimori Gamble on a tight end next year for Florida, who more than likely will take the majority of your reps. But after those guys are gone, Florida's really going to have to go from guys that they got in the 21 cycle. So I think Nick Elksness, the big body guy, moves really well. Had a lot of talk about him just, really playing well in the spring. So I think that's my guy, my pick. And I think that whenever you look at how Florida made the tight end position such a focal point with Kyle Pitts, who granted is a generational talent, but I think Nick Elksness has enough talent and enough upside to where he can be used in those same ways, do different things, use his big body, do different, moves really well. Yeah. So I can see some comparisons there. So that's my pick. Defense was a little tough for me, man. If you couldn't use Jason Marshall, because that's the obvious pick, that's definitely one. I went with DeJuan Black, and I think that whenever you have a guy that's a JUCO player, number one JUCO player, was already a highly regarded defensive, a guy coming out of the 2019 cycle when he was a high school prospect. I think when you've got a JUCO guy that you knew you could count on, he's a guy that you can use in different ways because he's so athletic. You could use him at money linebacker. Mm-hmm. If you want to throw him in some star positions, different things like that. I think that versatility is going to see him on the field. I almost went Jordan Young, though.
Yep, that's my guy. That's what I was going to pick. I think Trevez Johnson is obviously the guy that they want to be the answer at that nickelback spot. But I think Jordan Young really surprised a lot of people with his physicality in the spring. And I think if there was an issue for Florida last year, in part it was that obviously the secondary really kind of played off coverage a whole lot and really just gave up way too much cushion. I think from a schematic standpoint, Florida wants to shift that. They want to play more press man. They want to get in your face a little bit more at the line of scrimmage. And I think Trevez is going to be really, really good. I think he's got a really, really bright future in front of him at Florida. But if you're talking about guys that, say he struggles, I think Jordan Young's a guy that can absolutely step in and have a big impact at that nickelback spot.
My dark horse pick for offense long run, though, because obviously whenever you have a guy that's an early enrollee, those are the ones that make the most sense. I really like Austin Barber. I know he was a late addition, but when you look at the body transformations he made from junior year to senior year, he was a stock-up guy, finished a 4-star on 24/7 Sports. The fact of how you mentioned before that Florida really hasn't recruited a lot of those true tackle guys, I think he's going to have a shot.
Yeah, I think that's a good pick. I think that's, it's a guy that, like you said, not an early enrollee, so he's not really on my mind, but
Right.
Definitely a guy that could have an impact long
Early
term.
enrollee is going to definitely make the most impact just because they've been in the program long, they've had a chance. But that's one that I did. I when I was scanning through the commitment list, that's one that I did say,
Okay, I got a question for you because I don't really have a whole lot of insight on this just yet. What are your general thoughts on Jules Montanar's recruiting ability this far?
I think that, him being a younger guy, I think he's really come in and he's been really aggressive. You've seen him just recruiting different guys, from safety guys, from cornerback guys, from guys in his area of Tampa, Hillsborough, Polk County and those kind of areas. I think that he's going to have some time to, kind of build his name because yes, he's worked at different places like Alabama and Georgia in an off-field role, came from USF. So there's some familiarity with the central, with the central Florida, maybe Florida part of the state. I think that he's going to be hungry enough and he's going to put enough effort into recruiting that I think he's going to be one that can continue to build those relationships. And I think he's one that maybe won't have the biggest impact this year. I think he'll have a lot of effort this year, and I think he'll get some guys. And if he can get some guys, that's obviously going to fast track this type of thing. And what I'm talking about will be wrong. But I think that if he can continue to keep on the effort that he has, I think he can continue to be hungry enough and he can build his name up. And I think he'll be a good recruiter in the long run.
All right, Blake, what do you see as the biggest position need for 2022?
Offensive tackle, offensive line, but offensive tackle in general. I think Florida's done a really good job with interior part of the offensive line, but I think the tackle positions left a lot to be desired. And I think that they really need to not only get some bodies in there that are more true tackle guys, but start getting some of those guys like a Tyler Booker, a
Right.
4-star offensive lineman, top 100 guy that is going to come in and you don't have to come in and develop it as much. Sure, every lineman, every player needs development, but if you can get those guys that already have a high ceiling, I mean, that's the ideal move for Florida.
Yeah, I did a breakdown of the scholarship chart and kind of the numbers for the next class coming up earlier this week, and that was the one spot that jumped out. I think Florida needs to take anywhere between 2 to 4 offensive linemen just to kind of keep pace with numbers, keep the classes balanced. So again, you have ideally every year you have not just a chunk of upperclassmen to choose from, but you have some developing younger guys, and maybe 1 or 2 of those younger guys get involved early and become some of your multi-year starters. But I don't think there's any question that O-line is the spot where Florida really needs to focus in 2022. Blake, I got a question for me here. They want to know if I've tried the new 8% White Claws yet, and how white
That's
girl
why I
wasted,
laughed earlier.
how white girl wasted I get. No, I actually haven't, dude. So this may sound completely ridiculous, but I'm gonna out myself here. So I've been doing like margaritas lately, and my one thing about margaritas is they get like too sweet, right? Like, so I can only drink like one of them or whatever. So what I've been doing is I've been doing like the margarita mix with the tequila and all that, and then I'll take like not a White Claw, but I've been doing it's like Topo Chico. You ever heard of those?
No, I
Okay,
haven't.
they're seltzers like that. But they're like tropical flavors. So what I'll do is I'll like cut the drink a little bit by putting a little bit of the like mango or pineapple seltzer in there. So it's like a seltzery margarita, but dude, it's delicious. And y'all can make fun of me on the boards. Don't care. You should try it. It's really really good.
Sounds like my
Not
wife
mad.
Brooke. My
Yeah,
wife Brooke, she's a vodka soda type girl, so
there you
she's
go, man.
definitely the
It's
basic
like
girl
it's
drink.
like somewhere in
But she'll
between
put
there.
a
It's like
White
a
Claw in there with those, and I'm
oh yeah,
like, you
yeah.
have a problem.
That's
Like this is
that's
double
going
the
for it.
alcohol. What?
Yeah.
What? That is a definition of white girl wasted. Putting alcohol on top of your alcohol. Sorry, babe, but
Uh,
I'm worried. I'm really worried about you.
yeah, man. Try it out. Margarita seltzer. That's my new recommendation. Let's continue. Blake, we got a really really general question here, and you can go any direction you want with this. Maybe I'll start off. Just thoughts on how the season will go. I think, like I said, I think there's going to be a learning curve, particularly on the offense. I think the defense. I expect the defense to take a little bit less time to get settled. I think there's going to be some issues in the back end, but I think the front seven is going to be good enough that you're going to feel pretty good about the defense early on. I just see the schedule setting up. I don't know how that Alabama game is going to go. Alabama has a new quarterback to break in. They've got some question marks. I'm not expecting Florida to win that game, and so from that standpoint, it really the next couple weeks with Kentucky and Tennessee, as long as you get through those unscathed, really to me you turn to that October stretch where you have LSU and then you have a bye week and then you have Georgia. I think for Florida to maintain, they've got to win at least one of those 3 games between Alabama, LSU, Georgia. LSU really, again, should be a relatively down LSU team. So if you can't get by them, you got problems. I mean, that really was what sunk Florida's season last year was they lost to an LSU team they had no business losing to. I think if you get through into the Georgia game with one loss, anything can happen, man. Like Dan Mullen's a good game planner. I think Florida's defense is going to be I'm expecting them to be a lot better. I think they're going to be very aggressive, and I think they're going to probably be a unit that starts to force more turnovers, and that gives you a chance in a game against Georgia. So, I could see anywhere from a one-loss season to a four-loss season. If things go badly against Alabama, for some reason you trip up against a Kentucky or a Tennessee, things look really different really quickly. So I don't really know. This year is kind of, in some ways, a prove it year for me because, Florida does have to prove that it can maintain after it loses a lot of guys, and we're starting to get into the period where it's going to be mostly Dan Mullen's guys contributing. And so I don't have a good answer on that. I think it's going to depend on how this team kind of manages the ebbs and flows of the season.
Right, and I'm kind of on the same page with you. It's really a hard question to figure out how the season will go. I mean, I think it'll be good enough because I do think Florida's schedule does set up. Sure, there are some games that are a little bit harder than others. Alabama, like you mentioned, the Georgia game's never easy. LSU, we'll see how they fare after last year where they had a down year. But I think for the most part, a lot of these games, Florida can win, but they lose so many guys on that offensive side of the ball where they had that high powered offense that really carried them through a lot of games. The defense is going to have to step up. And I do think that adding guys, like Antonio Shelton, Daquan Newkirk is going to help them along the defensive line to be more flexible to guys like Brenton Cox, Zach Carter. I think that's going to start to keep guys from getting clogged at the linebacker position, clogged in some of those holes and getting blocked up. And I think that's going to obviously, it's just going to be such a trickle down effect for other parts of the defense. If some of those guys on the offensive side can step up, I think that Florida I think they can get to a 1-2 loss type of year. But, if not, if things don't go as well and there are some growing pains and they're a little bit more, heavier than what, you would think heading into the year, it's a hard question, like I said, because I do think there are so many different scenarios because it's just so many unprovens on the Florida's offensive side after losing so many surefire guys that are going to be big time players on offense last year.
All right, Blake, final question. We'll finish up with Emory Jones. How productive do we think Emory will be relative to Felipe Franks and Kyle Trask this year?
In terms of passing or just in general?
Production, just kind of in general. Where does he fit in that Felipe Franks to Kyle Trask kind of sliding scale, so to speak?
I think when you look at what Kyle Trask did throwing the ball last year, I think it's hard to match that. And he had a really, big, he was a Heisman finalist, that's a hard effort to match. But I think with the fact that he can throw and run, I think that his production can be on par just because he can do different things. Felipe Franks, yeah, they ran him. Kyle Trask, yeah, he did some running, very little, but I think that you're going to see Emory be run so much more. I think that's going to make defenses kind of cheat down on you to watch the run there. And I think that's going to open up some things in the passing game. So I think overall, from just being able to do different things, I think his production can be on par. Maybe not from a passing standpoint, because like I said, it's just hard to match those numbers Trask did. But I think that Emory, being such a versatile dual threat type of player, I think can keep his production up.
I think, when I think back to Felipe Franks in that 2018 season, yes, Felipe Franks was athletic enough to be a running quarterback. He never seemed super comfortable doing that to me.
No, not at all.
It really wasn't until the second half of the season, that South Carolina game where you really started to see him embrace kind of becoming a runner. And even then, it felt clunky.
It was like a power run type thing, too.
It was a power run kind of, and he didn't really seem fully comfortable with it. I think you're going to see Emory Jones be a lot more comfortable kind of running this offense. I think that's kind of what he was built to do. It's what Dan Mullen recruited him to do. I think it's going to look a lot more fluid. I mentioned earlier in the show, I could easily see a scenario where Emory Jones rushes for 800, 900 yards and leads the team in rushing. I mean, I legitimately believe that. I think he's got the breakaway ability to break some of those long runs, Lamar Jackson style, kind of running. I have my doubts about the passing game, and we've talked about that, the accuracy, the decision making. When I think about what, to me, this offense is most likely to look like, I think very much it'll look like, your typical Dan Mullen read option and all that. But I think you're going to see a separate kind of segment of plays where things break down and Emory Jones is able to make things happen as they break down. I really think back to, I think it was 2015 at LSU, where Will Grier had gotten popped the week before. Florida goes in with a very, very kind of rudimentary game plan with Treon Harris. And really you saw Treon just get really comfortable with Antonio Callaway. And Florida, surprisingly, was pretty competitive in that game, really just playing backyard football. I think Emory's going to be, he's obviously, intelligent enough to, I think, really get the system. And he'll play within the system sometimes. But there's also going to be times where things break down. And I think if his receivers are able to get on the same page and kind of improv, so to speak, I think Florida can be really, really fun to watch. You'd like to do that where it's only on, when plays go off schedule, rather than like something that becomes like a consistent part of the offense by design. But I do think that Florida's going to have that. And so when you talk about productivity, I think Emory Jones will be more productive than Felipe Franks was in 2018.
Yeah.
I don't know what the numbers will look like necessarily. I do think Florida's going to have to manage games based on its defense, based on the fact that they can run the ball. So I'm not sure they're going to put up all these gaudy numbers. Like last year, let's be honest with you, a lot of the big numbers that Kyle Trask and the offense put up were because they had to, because the defense kept giving up score after score after score. I don't think Florida's as a team is going to be built that way next year. And so I think it will be a lot about kind of control the clock, control game scenarios, and you'll be able to use Emory Jones's legs within the offense to do that. But I do think you're also going to see an element of unpredictability when things break down. And I think that's going to be a lot of fun to watch for Florida fans.
No doubt. We'll see how it goes, man. I mean, it's going to be a fun year for sure.
Absolutely. All right, Blake. Well, we hit on a lot of stuff there. We will obviously, continue to do these Q&As, particularly in the off season when there's not as much going on. I know we have some basketball news that will probably end up coming out in the next couple of days on assistant coaching hires. Maybe we'll shoot a quick reaction video / podcast on that. But for now, guys, that's going to do it for this episode of the Swamp 24/7 podcast. Thank you to everybody that chimed in with questions. If you're listening to this on a podcast platform, be sure to leave us a nice review. If you're watching it on YouTube, be sure to like the video if you enjoyed the content. Hit subscribe on the channel, and we'll be back with more Florida Gators content from Swamp 24/7 in the future. Thanks for tuning in.
Enjoy your 8% White Claws.
And enjoy the margarita seltzers. Signing off, guys. Thanks.